The late afternoon sun hung mercilessly over Mesa Springs, baking the wooden boardwalks and casting harsh shadows across the dusty main street. It was the summer of 1885, and Arizona Territory was suffering through its worst drought in 30 years. The once vibrant desert town now resembled a faded daguerreotype, all sharp edges and muted colors, the life slowly draining away with each rainless day. A hot wind swept through the street, carrying tumbleweeds and whispers of desperation. The saloon doors swung open, and four men stumbled out into the harsh sunlight. Their laughter cut through the afternoon distance as they adjusted their gun belts and squinted down the street. "There she is, the Apache witch!" The tallest among them pointed toward a slender figure at the far end of the street. Sierra's heart pounded against her ribs as she quickened her pace, her worn moccasins silent on the hard-packed earth. The medicine pouch pressed against her side beneath her threadbare dress, the weight of her people's knowledge and her solemn promise growing heavier with each passing day. The shouting behind her grew louder, but she didn't dare look back. 2 years of running had taught her that much. The sudden crack of a gunshot split the air. Sierra ducked instinctively as the bullet splintered the wooden post beside her. The wind began to pick up, driving stinging particles of sand against her skin. In the distance, an ominous wall of dust was sweeping toward the town, the approaching sandstorm both a threat and her only hope for escape. "You ain't welcome here, squaw!" Another shot, closer this time. Sierra darted between buildings, her dark eyes scanning desperately for shelter as the first gusts of the sandstorm reached the town. Dust swirled around her, obscuring her vision as she ran toward the outskirts of Mesa Springs. Her lungs burned with each breath, and the cut on her arm throbbed where a branch had caught her days before, the wound refusing to heal properly in the harsh conditions of her journey. At the edge of town, a small ranch appeared through the thickening dust, a weathered two-story house with a large barn and corral. No light shone from the windows. No smoke rose from the chimney. It looked empty, abandoned, or at least uninhabited at the moment. Perfect. Sierra slipped into the barn as the full force of the sandstorm descended upon Mesa Springs. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of hay and horses. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed a single horse in the far stall. The animal was lying on its side, breathing heavily, its coat slick with sweat despite the dryness of the day. Approaching cautiously, Sierra saw the infected wound on the horse's hind leg, angry and swollen, leaking a yellowish discharge. The animal's eyes were glazed with pain, and it barely acknowledged her presence. Sierra glanced toward the barn door. The howling wind had sealed her fate for now. There would be no leaving until the storm passed. With a deep breath, she knelt beside the suffering animal and opened her medicine pouch. If she was to be trapped here, she might as well make herself useful. "Shh," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on the horse's neck. "I will help you, my friend." From her pouch, she withdrew small packets of herbs, carefully preserved through her long journey. With practiced hands, she crushed dried sage, juniper berries, and a rare yellow flower found only in the high mountain valleys of her homeland. She softly sang an ancient healing song as she worked, the Apache words flowing like water over stones, smooth and purposeful. So absorbed was she in her work that Sierra didn't hear the barn door open over the howling wind. She didn't notice the tall figure watching from the shadows, a rifle held loosely in weathered hands. "Step away from that horse." The deep voice cut through her concentration like a knife. Sierra's hands froze mid-motion, the poultice of herbs half applied to the horse's infected wound. Slowly, she raised her gaze to meet cold blue eyes staring at her from beneath the brim of a dust-covered hat. Ethan Holloway hadn't expected company during the sandstorm, especially not an Apache woman tending to his prized horse. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his Winchester, not threatening, but ready. The years had taught him caution, if nothing else. "I said, step away," he repeated, his voice rough from disuse. Sierra rose smoothly to her feet, her hands visible, her face composed despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Your horse is dying," she said simply, her English clear but accented. "The infection will reach his heart by morning." Ethan's jaw tightened. Thunder wasn't just any horse. He was Catherine's favorite, the last living connection to his late wife. For 3 years since her death, the stallion had been his silent companion through grief's long, empty nights. And I suppose you know how to save him. Skepticism dripped from each word. Sierra met his gaze steadily. I do. A particularly violent gust rattled the barn walls, sending dust filtering through the rafters. In that moment, something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not softening exactly, but a calculation, a weighing of limited options. Who are you? What are you doing in my barn? He lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it ready. My name is Sierra. I needed shelter from the storm and the men who were shooting at me. She gestured to the horse. I found your animal suffering. I can help him, if you will allow it. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Her clothes were worn but clean, her posture dignified despite obvious exhaustion. The cut on her arm had been recently bandaged with a strip of cloth that was now soaked through with blood and dust. You're hurt, he observed flatly. Sierra glanced at her arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. It is nothing. Your horse needs attention more urgently. Another rattling gust shook the barn. Outside, the world had disappeared behind a curtain of swirling sand and dust. They were trapped together, at least until the storm passed. Ethan lowered his rifle completely, though he kept it in hand. If thunder dies, you'll wish those men in town had caught you. Sierra nodded once, understanding the threat and accepting the challenge. She knelt again beside the horse and resumed her work, aware of Ethan's watchful gaze from a few feet away. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, applying the poultice to draw out infection, then cleaning the wound with a tincture from a small glass bottle. This will burn, she warned, both to the horse and its owner, before applying the strong-smelling liquid. The animal jerked and whinnied in pain, but Sierra's touch remained firm and confident. Hold him, she instructed Ethan, not looking up. To his own surprise, Ethan complied, moving to kneel at the horse's head, murmuring low words of comfort as he had seen Catherine do countless times. The familiar ache in his chest returned at the memory, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the steady movements of Sierra's hands. Time stretched like pulled taffy as they worked together in the dim light of the barn. Outside, the sandstorm raged on, but inside, a different kind of tension filled the air. Not trust, certainly, but a fragile truce born of necessity. Finally, Sierra sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. The poultice must remain for the night. By morning, the infection will begin to drain. He will need fresh water and rest, but he will live. Ethan studied her work with a critical eye. The swelling already seemed less angry, and Thunder's breathing had steadied. Though he'd never admit it, he was impressed by her skill and efficiency. Where did you learn this? He asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding suspicion. I was the medicine woman for my people, Sierra answered simply, beginning to pack away her supplies. The admission carried weight, both in what was said and what remained unspoken. That she had been something before becoming a fugitive, that she had belonged somewhere before being forced to run. Ethan noticed her wince as she moved her injured arm. Let me see that, he said, more command than offer. Sierra hesitated, then extended her arm. The makeshift bandage was filthy, and beneath it, the cut was inflamed, though not as severely as Thunder's wound had been. Without a word, Ethan rose and fetched a small medical kit from a shelf. He had been a military surgeon before settling in Mesa Springs, and old habits died hard. He kept his instruments clean and his supplies organized, a small bastion of order in his otherwise solitary existence. This needs proper cleaning, he said, unwrapping the dirty bandage. How did it happen? A branch. 2 days ago. Sierra watched his movements with professional interest. You have medical training. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Army surgeon, Union, during the war. He worked as he spoke, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. You're lucky it's not worse. Sierra's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Luck has little to do with it. I have been treating it, but with limited supplies. Their eyes met briefly over her extended arm. Two healers recognizing each other across the divide of culture and circumstance. In that moment, they were not Apache and white, not fugitive and rancher, but simply two people who understood the fragility of flesh in the art of mending what was broken. The silence that followed was different from before, not hostile, but contemplative. When Ethan finished bandaging her arm, Sierra nodded her thanks and reached into her pocket, extracting 3 crumpled dollar bills. "For your trouble," she said, holding them out, "and for shelter until the storm passes." Ethan looked at the money, then back at her face. $3 was likely everything she had. Pride warred with necessity in her expression, and he recognized the struggle all too well. He had worn the same look when the bank began threatening to foreclose on his ranch after Catherine's illness drained their savings. "Keep it," he said gruffly, turning away to pack up his medical supplies. "Consider it payment for helping Thunder." Sierra didn't move, the bills still extended. "I do not accept charity." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dust-streaked hair. "It's not charity, it's an exchange of services." He gestured toward Thunder. "You helped my horse, I bandaged your arm." Outside, the wind began to die down, the howling diminishing to a low moan. The worst of the storm was passing. Sierra slowly returned the money to her pocket, her expression unreadable. "The storm will end soon. I should continue my journey." "To where?" The question slipped out before Ethan could stop himself. Sierra stiffened slightly. "The reservation to the north. I have family there." The hesitation suggested a lie, or at least not the complete truth. Ethan didn't press the matter. Everyone had secrets, and hers were none of his concern. Still, the thought of her continuing alone, injured and hunted, left a bitter taste in his mouth. Catherine would have insisted on helping further. He knew. Catherine, with her bottomless well of compassion that had both frustrated and awed him. "You can clean up into the house before you go," he found himself saying. "There's a pump out back for water, and you should eat something." Surprise flickered across Sierra's face before she composed herself. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than their brevity suggested. They left the barn together, stepping into a transformed world. The sandstorm had passed, leaving drifts of fine sand against buildings and fences. The late afternoon sun slanted through the settling dust, turning the air into a golden haze. In the distance, Mesa Springs looked like a mirage, its buildings half obscured by lingering dust clouds. Ethan's house stood solidly against the landscape, a 2-story structure of weathered wood and stone. Unlike many of the hastily constructed buildings in town, it had been built to last, a testament to optimism that now seemed out of place in the drought-stricken land. Sierra followed him up the back steps to a covered porch. A hand pump stood over a large stone basin, the metal handle gleaming from regular use. Beside it hung a towel, stiff from drying in the arid air. "I'll get you some fresh clothes," Ethan said, disappearing into the house. Alone on the porch, Sierra looked out over the land that stretched beyond the ranch house. Despite the drought, Ethan had managed to maintain a small garden, the plants struggling but alive. A practiced eye could see the careful irrigation system he had constructed, making the most of limited water. When Ethan returned with a bundle of clothing, Sierra was already washing the dust from her face and arms, the cool water a blessed relief after days of travel with minimal supplies. She accepted the clothes with the nod of thanks. "They were Catherine's," he said, the name spoken with careful neutrality. "My late wife." Sierra held the bundle more carefully, understanding the significance of what he was offering. "I will treat them with respect." Ethan nodded once, then turned to go back inside. "There's food on the table when you're ready." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Sierra changed quickly, grateful for the clean fabric against her skin. The dress was simple, faded blue cotton with small pearl buttons, and slightly too large, but infinitely better than her dust-caked clothing. She washed her face again, the cool water revealing copper skin burnished by years under the desert sun. Her long black hair, usually kept in a practical braid, hung loose around her shoulders as it dried. Inside the house, Ethan moved about the kitchen with mechanical efficiency, setting out bread, dried beef, and a pot of beans he'd cooked that morning. His thoughts churned like the dust storm that had just passed. What was he doing, inviting an Apache woman into his home? The town already regarded him with a mixture of pity and suspicion since Catherine's death. This would only fuel their whispers. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. Something about Sierra's dignity in the face of exhaustion and danger reminded him of values he'd once held dear. Compassion, respect, the physician's duty to heal regardless of circumstance. Values that had been slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of grief and isolation. The back door opened, and Sierra entered the kitchen. The transformation was striking. Clean and dressed in Catherine's clothing, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her features, no longer obscured by dust and exhaustion, revealed a woman in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to the table. "Eat." Sierra took a seat, her movements graceful despite obvious hunger. She waited until Ethan sat across from her before reaching for the food. They ate in silence, the ticking of the clock on the mantel the only sound in the room. "Thank you," Sierra said finally, after finishing a second helping of beans, "for the food and clothes." Ethan nodded, studying her over his coffee cup. The questions he wanted to ask crowded his mind. Why was she being hunted? What was in the medicine pouch she guarded so carefully? Where was she really going? Instead, he asked, "Will you check on Thunder again before you leave?" "Of course," Sierra's expression softened slightly at the mention of the horse. "The poultice should be changed, and I will leave you instructions for his care." A sharp knock at the front door shattered the momentary peace. Both froze, eyes meeting across the table in sudden wariness. Ethan rose first, motioning for Sierra to stay seated. "Wait here," he said, quietly, moving to the window to peer through the curtains. His shoulders tensed at what he saw. "It's Crawford." Sierra's expression remained calm, but her hand moved instinctively to the medicine pouch hidden beneath her borrowed dress. "The mayor?" Ethan nodded grimly. "And the most powerful man in Mesa Springs." He straightened his shirt and ran a hand through his hair. "Stay quiet. I'll get rid of him." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Ethan crossed to the front door, composing his features into a neutral expression before opening it. Mayor Howard Crawford stood on the porch, impeccably dressed despite the recent sandstorm. In his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and mustache, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. Behind him waited his buggy, the horse stamping impatiently. "Holloway," Crawford said by way of greeting, "I need to speak with you." Ethan didn't move from the doorway. "What about?" Crawford's eyes narrowed at the lack of invitation to enter. "It's about Emma. She's taken ill." Something in Crawford's voice, a crack in the usually impenetrable facade, made Ethan step aside. "Come in." As Crawford entered the front parlor, his gaze swept the room with the assessment of a man who valued and cataloged possessions. His eyes lingered on the half-empty plates on the kitchen table visible through the doorway. "You have company?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. Before Ethan could answer, Sierra stepped into the parlor, her chin high and her expression composed. Crawford's reaction was immediate, his body stiffening and his hand moving instinctively toward the gun he always carried. "What is this?" he demanded, looking from Sierra to Ethan. "Why do you have an Apache in your home, Holloway?" Ethan moved slightly, positioning himself between Crawford and Sierra. She sought shelter from the storm, and from men in town who were shooting at her. Crawford's lip curled. "Jacob Thornton and his boys, I'd wager. Always causing trouble after a few drinks." He focused on Sierra, his gaze cold. "Still, her kind aren't welcome in Mesa Springs. You know that." "This is my property, Crawford," Ethan said quietly. "And she's leaving once she's finished treating my horse." "Treating your—" Crawford broke off, shaking his head in disbelief. "Don't tell me you're letting an Indian practice her heathen medicine on your livestock." Sierra spoke for the first time, her voice steady. "The horse had an infected wound that would have killed him by morning. I have stopped the infection." Crawford ignored her, addressing Ethan as if she hadn't spoken. "You were an army surgeon, for God's sake. Have you fallen so far that you're relying on savage superstitions now?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "You said Emma is ill. What are her symptoms?" The abrupt change of subject caught Crawford off guard. He hesitated, glancing again at Sierra with undisguised suspicion before answering. "Fever, weakness. She can barely keep food down." Worry crept into his voice despite his obvious attempt to maintain composure. "It started 3 days ago. Dr. Warren has been attending her, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He had seen this before. Headaches, confusion, a rash on her chest and neck. Crawford's eyes widened. "Yes. How did you know?" "Because Catherine had the same symptoms," Ethan said quietly. The memory rose unbidden. Catherine's flushed face, her delirious murmurs, the rash that spread despite all his medical knowledge and desperate efforts to save her. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken connections. Crawford cleared his throat. Warren mentioned that. He said, he said it might be the same illness that took your wife. Sierra watched the exchange with keen interest, her dark eyes moving between the two men. This illness, she said carefully, it affects mostly women and children? Both men turned to look at her, Crawford with irritation, Ethan with surprise. Yes, Ethan answered before Crawford could object. Primarily, though some men have shown milder symptoms. Sierra nodded thoughtfully. And it begins with the fever, then progresses to confusion and the rash? That's enough, Crawford snapped. I didn't come here to discuss medical matters with... Yes, Ethan interrupted, ignoring Crawford's outburst. That's the pattern. You've seen this before? Something flickered in Sierra's eyes, recognition, and perhaps a decision being made. I have, she said simply. Crawford looked between them, desperate hope warring with ingrained prejudice on his face. Warren says there's nothing to be done except pray, he said finally. Emma's mother is already gone. I can't lose my daughter too. The raw vulnerability in his voice stripped away the mayor's usual authority, leaving just a frightened father in its place. For a moment, no one spoke, the ticking of the clock marking the passage of time that might be running out for Emma Crawford. Sierra broke the silence. I may be able to help your daughter. Crawford's head snapped up, his expression hardening again. With your witch doctor remedies? I think not. Howard, Ethan said quietly, using the mayor's first name for perhaps the first time in their long acquaintance. If Emma has what Catherine had, Warren can't help her. You know that. The mayor's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of his daughter's illness momentarily overcoming his prejudice. What would you suggest, then? That I bring an Apache healer to my home? The town would never... The town doesn't need to know, Ethan interrupted. Bring Emma here. Say you've asked for my medical opinion as a former surgeon. Sierra watched Crawford carefully, seeing the battle playing out on his face. Your daughter's life, she said softly. Is it worth less than your pride? Crawford's head jerked up, anger flashing in his eyes. You dare. She's right, Ethan cut in, and you know it. For a long moment, Crawford stood frozen, caught between desperation and decades of ingrained belief. Finally, he exhaled slowly. I'll consider it, he said, his tone making it clear how much the concession cost him. But know this, if anything happens to Emma, there won't be a place in this territory where either of you can hide. The threat hung in the air as Crawford turned to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at Ethan. The bank notice, he said abruptly. 30 days until foreclosure. I could extend that if... He left the implication hanging. Ethan's expression hardened. I'll find a way to pay. Crawford nodded once, his usual mask of authority sliding back into place. See that you do. With that, he stepped out into the gathering dusk, the door closing firmly behind him. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Ethan turned to Sierra. You've seen this illness before, he said. It wasn't a question. Sierra nodded, her expression grave. Among my people, 3 summers ago, many died before we found a treatment. A treatment? Ethan's voice sharpened. What treatment? Sierra met his gaze steadily. One that requires ingredients I have in limited supply, and knowledge your Dr. Warren would dismiss as savage superstitions. The bitterness in her last words echoed Crawford's earlier slur. Ethan studied her face, seeing the shadows of old wounds that had nothing to do with her injured arm. Catherine, he began, then stopped, the name still difficult to say aloud. My wife, could she have been saved with this treatment of yours? The question hung between them, weighted with 3 years of grief and guilt. Sierra considered her words carefully before answering. If caught early enough, yes. The disease moves quickly, but it can be fought with the right medicines. Ethan turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Catherine might have lived if he had known then what Sierra was offering now. The irony was almost unbearable. Why would you help Crawford's daughter? He asked finally, still facing away. After how he treated you? After how this town treats your people? Sierra's reflection appeared in the window glass beside his own, her borrowed dress a pale ghost against the gathering night. I am a healer, she said simply. That is who I am, regardless of who needs healing. Ethan turned to face her, really seeing her for the first time, not as an intruder or a curiosity, but as a woman of substance and principle. "You were going to leave at first light," he said. "If you stay to help Emma, you risk those men finding you again." Sierra's hand moved unconsciously to the hidden medicine pouch. "There are greater risks in this world than a few drunk cowboys." Something in her tone suggested deeper dangers, secrets she wasn't sharing. Ethan didn't press. He had secrets of his own. "You can stay here," he found himself saying, "until Emma is treated. I have a spare room upstairs." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "No charity. You'll be working for your keep by helping with Thunder in the garden, and possibly saving a young girl's life." Sierra's lips curved in a small, genuine smile, the first he had seen from her. "An exchange of services," she said, echoing his earlier words. "Exactly." Ethan extended his hand, the gesture formal but sincere. "Do we have a deal, miss?" He realized he didn't know her full name. "Just Sierra," she said, taking his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from years of work. "And yes, Dr. Holloway, we have a deal." As they stood in the fading light of day, hands clasped in agreement, neither could have predicted how this unlikely alliance would change their lives, and the town of Mesa Springs forever. The first pieces of a complex puzzle were sliding into place, driven by circumstance, necessity, and perhaps something larger than either could yet recognize. Outside, the desert night settled over the land, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky. Inside, two wounded healers began the delicate dance of trust, each carrying burdens the other couldn't fully see, yet somehow sensing they were no longer carrying them alone. Dawn broke over Mesa Springs with the promise of another scorching day. The first rays of sunlight painted the weathered boards of Ethan's ranch house in hues of amber and gold, momentarily disguising the effects of years of neglect. In the eastern sky, a hawk circled lazily on rising thermals, its keen eyes scanning the desert floor for unwary prey. Sierra woke with the sun, a habit ingrained since childhood. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. A small bedroom with simple furnishings, lace curtains stirring in the breeze from the half-open window. Then memory returned. Ethan Holloway, the injured horse, Mayor Crawford and his sick daughter, the agreement. She rose silently, dressing in her own clothes, now clean and mended by her careful hands the night before. Catherine's blue dress lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed, a silent acknowledgement of the generosity behind the loan. Sierra touched the fabric once, wondering about the woman who had worn it, who had shared Ethan's life before illness took her away. Downstairs, the house remained quiet. Sierra moved through the kitchen like a shadow, noting the neat organization that spoke of military training and bachelor habits. Coffee grounds waited beside the stove, and she set about preparing a pot, the familiar ritual grounding her in this unfamiliar place. As the coffee began to percolate, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, Sierra slipped outside to check on Thunder. The morning air still held the night's coolness, a brief respite before the sun reclaimed its dominance. In the barn, the horse greeted her with a soft nickering sound, already standing instead of lying in pain as he had been the previous day. "Good morning, my friend," Sierra murmured, approaching the stall. "You are feeling better, I see." She examined the wound carefully, pleased to find the poultice had drawn out much of the infection overnight. The swelling had reduced significantly, and the angry red streaks that had been spreading up the leg were already fading. Gently, she removed the old poultice and prepared a fresh one from her dwindling supplies, singing softly under her breath as she worked. "I haven't heard that song before." Sierra's hands remained steady despite her surprise at Ethan's voice behind her. She finished applying the poultice before turning to face him. He stood in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the brightening sky, a coffee cup in his hand. "It is an old healing song," she explained, rising to her feet, "from my grandmother and her grandmother before her." Ethan moved closer, examining Thunder's wound with the physician's critical eye. "Whatever it is, it seems to be working. He's remarkably improved." "The infection is draining," Sierra confirmed. "He will need rest for a few more days, but the danger has passed." A hint of relief softened Ethan's features. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than their brevity suggested. "There's coffee in the kitchen." They walked back to the house together, an unexpected companionship forming in the shared silence of the early morning. In the kitchen, Sierra poured herself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching as the land gradually revealed itself in the growing light. "The garden needs attention," Ethan said, breaking the silence. The storm knocked over some of the supports for the bean plants. Sierra nodded, understanding this was not idle conversation, but the beginning of their working arrangement. "I can fix them. And your irrigation system, it is clever, but could be more efficient." Ethan raised an eyebrow, a trace of defensiveness crossing his features. "It works well enough." "It wastes water at the southern end," Sierra observed, unperturbed by his tone. "In a drought, every drop matters." Ethan studied her over the rim of his coffee cup, professional pride warring with practical necessity. Finally, he nodded. "Show me what you would change." The morning passed in shared labor under the strengthening sun. Sierra proved her worth quickly, demonstrating techniques for water conservation that had sustained her people through countless droughts. Her knowledge of desert plants impressed even Ethan, who had spent years adapting his Eastern medical training to the harsh realities of Arizona territory. By midday, they had repaired the storm damage and implemented several improvements to the irrigation system. Sweat dampened Ethan's shirt as he drove the last stake into the ground, securing a row of climbing beams to their new supports. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, straightening up to survey their work. Sierra paused in her task of mulching the base of the plants with straw to conserve moisture. "My people have lived in this land for generations," she said simply. "We understand its patterns, its needs. We survive by working with it, not against it." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider approached from town, the dust cloud rising behind the horse visible long before the figure came into focus. "Stay here," Ethan said, instinctively moving to position himself between Sierra and the approaching visitor. Sierra ignored the instruction, rising to stand beside him, her expression composed but alert. "I do not hide," she said quietly. As the rider drew closer, Ethan recognized the lean figure of James Miles, Mesa Springs deputy sheriff. A former Union soldier like himself, Miles was one of the few people in town Ethan still considered something of a friend, though even that relationship had grown distant after Catherine's death. Miles reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the garden, taking in the scene before him with sharp, observant eyes. "Holloway," he greeted, tipping his hat. His gaze shifted to Sierra, registering her presence without surprise. "Ma'am." The respectful acknowledgement was unusual enough that both Ethan and Sierra took note of it. Miles dismounted, leading his horse closer. "Word travels fast," Ethan remarked dryly. Miles snorted. "In a town this size? Crawford was barely back from your place before half of Mesa Springs knew you were harboring an Apache woman." He glanced at Sierra again. "No offense intended, ma'am." "None taken," Sierra replied, studying the lawman with cautious interest. Unlike many white men, he looked directly at her when speaking, a small but significant sign of respect. "What brings you out here officially, Miles?" Ethan asked, noting the badge pinned to the deputy's vest. "Or is this a social call?" Miles removed his hat, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "Bit of both, I suppose. Thought you should know there's a group of bounty hunters in town. Arrived late last night asking questions." Sierra stiffened almost imperceptibly, but the reaction didn't escape either man's notice. "What kind of questions?" Ethan asked, his tone carefully neutral. "They're looking for an Apache woman," Miles said, his eyes on Sierra. "One carrying what they described as a valuable medicine book stolen from white settlers. They've got a significant bounty posted, $500. Ethan let out a low whistle. "That's a small fortune in these parts." "Indeed it is," Miles agreed. "Enough to turn a lot of heads, especially in hard times like these." He paused, studying Sierra's impassive face. "They're working for some outfit called the Washington Pharmaceutical Company. Ring any bells?" Sierra's expression remained carefully controlled, but Ethan noticed her hand move subtly toward the medicine pouch she always kept close. "I know of no stolen book," she said evenly, "and I have taken nothing that was not mine by right." Miles nodded slowly as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "Well, these men seem mighty determined." Their leader goes by Samuel Blackwood, tall fellow, scar down his right cheek, missing the top joint of his left little finger. Something flickered in Sierra's eyes. recognition, and perhaps fear. This time, the reaction was clear enough that Miles couldn't miss it. "You know him?" the deputy stated. Not a question. Sierra met his gaze steadily. "We have encountered each other before." Miles waited, but when she offered no further explanation, he simply nodded again. "Just thought you should know they're asking around town. So far, no one's mentioned seeing you here specifically, but it's only a matter of time." "Why are you telling us this?" Ethan asked, the question direct and pointed. "You're an officer of the law. If there's a legitimate bounty, I've seen what happens when men hunt other human beings for money," Miles interrupted, his voice hard-edged with old memories. "Barfed with the 2nd Kansas Colored Volunteers for a spell during the war. Saw how they were treated by both sides." He replaced his hat, adjusting it against the sun. "Let's just say I believe in actual justice, not whatever those bounty hunters are selling." The revelation hung in the air between them. Ethan had known Miles served in the Union Army, but hadn't been aware of his specific assignment. It explained much about the deputy's character and his unusual approach to law enforcement in a frontier town like Mesa Springs. "I appreciate the warning," Ethan said finally. Miles mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "I'd stay clear of town for a few days, if I were you," he advised, gathering the reins. "Both of you." With a final nod, he turned his horse and rode away, dust rising behind him like a ghost in the midday heat. When the deputy was out of earshot, Ethan turned to Sierra. "You want to tell me what that was all about?" Sierra's eyes remained on the retreating figure of Miles. "It seems I have brought trouble to your door. I should leave." "And go where?" Ethan challenged. "With Blackwood and his men combing the territory for you?" He shook his head. "Besides, you made a deal to help with Emma Crawford. Are you going back on that?" The question struck at Sierra's core values, as Ethan had known it would. Her expression tightened, torn between self-preservation and her healer's oath. "I keep my promises," she said finally, "but you should know the risk you take by sheltering me." Ethan's laugh was short and without humor. "In case you haven't noticed, I don't have much left to lose. The bank's about to take my land. The town already thinks I'm half crazy since Catherine died, and my best company these days is a horse." He started walking back toward the house, the conversation clearly over as far as he was concerned. After a moment's hesitation, Sierra followed, her thoughts churning like storm clouds on the horizon. Inside, the house offered little relief from the heat. Ethan moved to the kitchen pump, splashing water on his face before filling 2 glasses. He handed one to Sierra without comment, then took a long drink from his own. "This medicine book they're looking for," he said finally, setting down his glass. "Is it real?" Sierra's fingers tightened around her water glass. "Not as they describe it," she said carefully. "What I carry is the knowledge of my people, healing traditions passed down through generations. It belongs to no one but those who have earned the right to use it. And the Washington Pharmaceutical Company wants it. They want to own what cannot be owned," Sierra corrected, a flash of anger breaking through her composed exterior. "To take ancient wisdom, strip it of its spiritual context, and sell it for profit." Ethan studied her face, seeing the passion beneath the controlled surface. "That knowledge," he said slowly. "Could it help Emma Crawford and others with the same illness?" Sierra met his gaze directly. "Yes, but not as they would use it, broken into parts, divorced from understanding. But you could use it properly. If I had all the necessary ingredients, yes." Sierra's expression clouded. "Some are difficult to find, especially in a drought year." Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his chest as he considered their situation. "We need to make a list," he said finally. "Everything you would need to treat Emma and any others who fall ill." Sierra raised an eyebrow, surprised by his matter-of-fact approach. "You believe me then? Without proof?" "I believe you saved my horse when modern medicine would have failed," Ethan replied simply. "And I've seen enough of the world to know that Western science doesn't have all the answers." A shadow crossed his face. If it did, Catherine would still be alive. The raw honesty in his voice created a moment of connection between them, a shared understanding of loss and the limitations of human knowledge in the face of suffering. Sierra nodded once, acknowledging both his pain and his pragmatism. "I will make a list," she agreed. The afternoon stretched before them, filled with practical preparations. Sierra inventoried her remaining supplies while Ethan searched the house for items that might be useful. To his surprise, he found a small journal of Catherine's that documented local plants and their properties, a hobby she had pursued with characteristic thoroughness during their early years in Mesa Springs. "Your wife was a botanist?" Sierra asked when he showed her the journal. "Amateur naturalist," Ethan corrected, a hint of pride warming his voice. "She was fascinated by the desert ecosystem. Said it was so different from Pennsylvania where she grew up." Sierra turned the pages carefully, noting the detailed drawings and observations. "She had a good eye," she commented, "and respect for the land." She did. Ethan watched as Sierra's fingers traced one particular illustration, a delicate purple flower Catherine had noted for its unusual blooming pattern during drought years. "She would have liked you, I think." The comment surprised them both, hanging in the air like an unexpected visitor. Sierra closed the journal gently, returning it to Ethan without meeting his eyes. "This will be helpful," she said, steering the conversation back to safer ground. "Some of what I need may be found in the foothills to the east, according to her notes." Ethan cleared his throat. "Good. We can ride out tomorrow at first light, before the worst heat of the day." The rest of the afternoon passed in practical tasks, preparing medicines from Sierra's existing supplies, repairing damaged garden tools, checking on Thunder's improving condition. They worked together with increasing ease, finding a rhythm that required minimal conversation, each anticipating the other's needs in a way that felt both strange and oddly familiar. As dusk approached, bringing marginal relief from the day's heat, a wagon appeared on the horizon, approaching slowly from the direction of town. Both Ethan and Sierra tensed at the sight, but as the vehicle drew closer, they recognized Marjorie Foster's distinctive white mare pulling her small buckboard. "It's all right," Ethan said, seeing Sierra's wariness. "Marjorie's a friend, probably the only one I have left in Mesa Springs besides Miles." Sierra nodded but remained alert as the wagon pulled up to the front of the house. Marjorie Foster was a widow in her early 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp blue eyes that missed very little. She had been Catherine's friend first, but after her death, had appointed herself Ethan's unofficial guardian, bringing occasional meals and sharp-tongued advice whether he wanted it or not. "Well," Marjorie said by way of greeting as she climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age, "I see the rumors are true for once." Her gaze assessed Sierra with frank curiosity, but no hostility. Ethan stepped forward to help with the basket Marjorie had brought. "Sierra, this is Mrs. Marjorie Foster. Marjorie, this is Sierra." "Ma'am," Sierra acknowledged with a respectful nod. Marjorie returned the nod. "Brought some fresh bread and preserves," she said, handing the basket to Ethan. "Figured you could use it, what with company and all." "Thank you," Ethan said, knowing better than to refuse Marjorie's offerings. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" "I would indeed," Marjorie replied promptly. "Got quite a bit to tell you about what's happening in town." She glanced meaningfully at Sierra. "Things you both should know." Inside, Sierra prepared coffee, while Ethan set out Marjorie's bread and blackberry preserves. The older woman settled at the kitchen table, removing her gloves with deliberate movements. "Town's in quite a state," she began without preamble. "Those bounty hunters are stirring up trouble, offering drinks at the saloon to anyone with information about an Apache woman traveling alone." She accepted a cup of coffee from Sierra with a nod of thanks. "And Emma Crawford's taken a turn for the worse. Dr. Warren's told the mayor to prepare for the worst." Ethan and Sierra exchanged a glance, the news adding urgency to their plans. "There's more," Marjorie continued, spreading preserves on a thick slice of bread. "Crawford's been asking questions about you, Ethan, wanting to know if you've been acting peculiar lately." "Peculiar?" Ethan repeated, frowning. "What does that even mean?" Marjorie shrugged. "Who knows? But he seemed mighty interested in whether you've been keeping to yourself more than usual or showing any strange behaviors." Sierra set her coffee cup down slowly. "He suspects Dr. Holloway may be involved with the illness." Both Ethan and Marjorie turned to her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "In my experience," Sierra explained, "when a disease cannot be explained, people look for someone to blame. Often it is the outsider, the different one, or the one who has knowledge they do not understand." Marjorie nodded slowly. "She's right. There's already talk that the illness might be some kind of curse or punishment." She fixed Ethan with a stern look. And you, my dear, have been the town eccentric ever since you shut yourself away after Catherine died. Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That's ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for God's sake. Why would I cause an illness? People fear what they don't understand, Sierra said quietly, and fear makes them dangerous. The truth of her words settled over them like a shadow. For a moment, no one spoke, each lost in private thoughts about the precarious nature of their situation. Marjorie broke the silence. Well, I, for one, think it's about time you had some company out here, she said briskly, nodding towards Sierra. This place has been like a mausoleum for too long. She turned to Sierra. And I'm glad he's finally letting someone help with that garden. It was Catherine's pride and joy, you know. She'd hate to see it struggling. Sierra offered a small smile. It is a good garden, even in drought. She must have had strong medicine to make things grow in such difficult conditions. That she did, Marjorie agreed, a flash of approval in her eyes at Sierra's understanding. She had what my mother used to call green magic, a way with plants that couldn't be taught. Ethan watched the exchange with a strange feeling in his chest. Not pain exactly, but a softening around the edges of grief that had been sharp and unyielding for so long. Hearing Catherine spoken of, not with pity, but with admiration, felt like the first cool breeze after an endless summer. As twilight deepened into night, Marjorie prepared to leave. At the wagon, she pulled Ethan aside while Sierra carried the empty basket back to the house. You be careful, Ethan, she warned, her voice low and serious. Crawford's desperate over his daughter, and desperate men do desperate things. She glanced toward the house where Sierra had disappeared. And those bounty hunters? They're not the type to ask questions first. The leader, Blackwood, has a reputation even among his kind. We'll be careful, Ethan promised, helping her up to the wagon seat. Marjorie gathered the reins, then paused, studying his face in the fading light. You know, this is the most alive I've seen you look in 3 years, she observed. Catherine would approve. Before Ethan could respond to that startling assessment, she clicked to her camera and set off, leaving him standing in a swirl of dust and unexpected emotions. Inside, he found Sierra at the kitchen table, sorting through her medicine pouch by the light of a kerosene lamp. The small leather bag lay open, revealing an array of packets, bottles, and small carved implements. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, cataloging and organizing with the focus of a scientist in her laboratory. Will it be enough? Ethan asked, nodding toward the supplies. Sierra looked up, her face half in shadow, half illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp. For Emma, yes, if we can find the missing components tomorrow. For an outbreak, she shook her head slightly, we would need more. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her, watching her methodical movements. Tell me about this illness, he said. In your experience, what causes it? Sierra considered the question, her hands continuing their work. Among my people, we first saw it after trading with settlers who had come from the east. It spread quickly through the women and children, then to some of the men. Suggesting it's contagious, Ethan mused, the doctor in him engaging with the problem. Possibly waterborne, given the pattern in town, households using the same wells have been affected most. Sierra nodded. Water, yes, but not in the way you think. The illness comes from tiny creatures that live in stagnant water, especially during drought when animals and humans must share dwindling sources. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued despite his ingrained skepticism. Creatures too small to see? Like bacteria? If that is your word for them, yes. Sierra selected a small packet from her collection, opening it to reveal a fine greenish powder. This, mixed with bark from the willow and flowers of the purple cone plant, kills these creatures and helps the body fight the fever. Fascinating, Ethan murmured, genuine respect in his voice. Western medicine is only beginning to understand germ theory, yet your people have been treating these illnesses successfully for generations. Different paths to the same understanding, Sierra said with a slight shrug. Your science and my traditions. Both seek to heal, only the language differs. Their eyes met across the table, another moment of connection forming between these two healers from vastly different worlds. In the warm glow of the lamp, barriers of culture and training momentarily dissolved, leaving only shared purpose in growing mutual respect. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door, urgent, demanding. Both froze, instantly alert. Stay here, Ethan said, rising quickly and moving to the window. Peering through the curtains, he saw Mayor Crawford's buggy, the man himself standing impatiently on the porch. "It's Crawford again." Sierra quickly gathered her supplies, securing them in the medicine pouch. "Something has happened," she said, reading the urgency in Ethan's expression. Ethan nodded grimly. Emma must have worsened. He crossed to the door, composing himself before opening it. Crawford stood on the porch, his usually immaculate appearance in disarray. Jacket unbuttoned, hair uncombed, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion or tears or both. "Holloway," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need your help. She's—" He broke off, struggling for composure. "Come in," Ethan said, stepping aside. Crawford entered, stopping short when he saw Sierra at the table. For once, he showed no reaction to her presence beyond a flicker of recognition. "Warren says she won't last the night," he said flatly, addressing Ethan but glancing at Sierra. "He's tried everything in his medical bag. Nothing helps." Sierra rose slowly, her expression grave but composed. "The fever has reached her heart?" Crawford nodded jerkily. "And the rash? It's everywhere now." His voice cracked slightly. "She's delirious, calling for her mother." Ethan felt the familiar ache of helplessness that had haunted him since Catherine's death. "Howard, I'm not sure what I can do that Warren hasn't—" "Not you," Crawford interrupted, turning to Sierra with an effort that was visibly painful. "Her." He swallowed hard. You said you might be able to help." The admission clearly cost him dearly. The proud mayor of Mesa Springs, forced by desperation to seek help from a woman his society had taught him to despise. Yet in this moment, he was simply a father watching his child slip away, willing to grasp at any hope, however unlikely. Sierra studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned to gather her medicine pouch. "We will need clean water, fresh linens, and privacy," she said, her tone professional and matter-of-fact. "No interruptions from your Dr. Warren or anyone else." Crawford nodded rapidly. "Anything, whatever you need." "And one more thing," Sierra added, fixing him with a steady gaze. "You will not question my methods, and you will follow my instructions exactly. This is not negotiable." For an instant, Crawford's habitual arrogance resurged, but desperation quickly smothered it. "Agreed," he said stiffly. Ethan, watching the exchange with a mixture of concern and admiration, moved to collect his medical bag. "I'll come too," he said, "if that's acceptable." He glanced between Crawford and Sierra. Sierra nodded once. "Your knowledge may be useful, and a female patient should have a chaperone for propriety, should she not?" A hint of irony colored the last words, acknowledging the social conventions that would normally prevent her from treating a white girl. Crawford seemed about to object, then thought better of it. "We should hurry," he said instead, already moving toward the door. "Every minute counts." As they followed Crawford out to his buggy, Ethan caught Sierra's arm gently. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "If Emma dies under your care," Sierra's expression was resolute. "I am a healer," she said simply. "This is who I am, regardless of the risk." The ride to Crawford's home passed in tense silence, the buggy moving swiftly through the dark streets of Mesa Springs. Few lights still burned in the windows they passed, the town having settled into uneasy sleep. At the far end of Main Street, the Crawford mansion stood apart from other buildings, a two-story structure of imported stone and native timber that proclaimed its owner's status more effectively than any political title. As they approached, Sierra noted the solitary lamp burning in an upstairs window. The sick room, she guessed. Despite the late hour, a figure waited on the porch. The tall, thin form of Dr. Warren, his medical bag at his feet, and a thunderous expression on his face. "This won't be easy," Ethan murmured as Crawford reined the horse to a stop. Sierra's voice was equally low but determined. "Few things worth doing are." Warren stepped forward as they descended from the buggy, his attention focused on Crawford. "Howard, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, ignoring both Ethan and Sierra. "I told you I would return at dawn to check on Emma." "I've asked for additional consultation," Crawford replied stiffly. Warren's gaze swept over Ethan with contempt before settling on Sierra with open hostility. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "An Indian witch doctor? After all my years of service to this town, to your family?" Crawford's exhaustion and fear hardened suddenly into anger. 3 people have died of this illness in the past month, Warren, including my housekeeper. Now my Emma lies upstairs at death's door, and you tell me to prepare myself and make her comfortable. His voice rose with each word. I will try anything, anything to save my daughter. Warren drew himself up, professional pride warring with genuine concern. Howard, please. These folk remedies are more likely to harm than help. At least let me supervise. No, Sierra interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. My methods require concentration and specific protocols. Your presence would be a distraction. Warren turned to her, seeing her directly for the first time. You have no right. She has every right I give her in my home, Crawford cut in, his patience clearly at an end. And I have given her full authority in Emma's treatment tonight. He fixed Warren with a hard stare. You may return tomorrow, doctor. For now, your services are not required. The dismissal was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Warren's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but years of social conditioning prevented him from directing it at Crawford. Instead, he turned to Ethan. I expected better from a man of science, he said coldly. When this goes poorly, and it will, you'll share responsibility for the outcome. Gathering his dignity, he collected his bag and descended the porch steps, brushing past them without another word. Crawford watched him go with a mixture of guilt and defiance. He's been our family physician for 20 years, he said, almost to himself. A good man, in his way. A good man limited by his training, Ethan replied diplomatically. Sometimes we need to look beyond what we've been taught to find answers. Crawford nodded absently, already moving toward the front door. This way, he said, leading them into the imposing house and up a grand staircase. The sick room was at the end of a long hallway, the door slightly ajar to allow air circulation. As they approached, Sierra felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came before entering a space filled with suffering. She had learned long ago that to be an effective healer, she must remain centered and calm, channeling compassion without being overwhelmed by it. Crawford pushed the door open, revealing a large bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed. Despite the grandeur of the furnishings, the scene was heartbreakingly familiar to both healers. A young girl lying pale and still among tumbled sheets, her breathing shallow, her skin marked with the distinctive rash of the illness. Emma Crawford was 16, with her father's dark hair spread across the pillow and her late mother's delicate features now flushed with fever. At their entrance, her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused, but struggling toward consciousness. "Papa?" she whispered, the single word a monumental effort. Crawford moved swiftly to her side, taking her hand gently. "I'm here, Emma. I've brought help." He gestured towards Sierra and Ethan. "Dr. Holloway and a specialist." Sierra approached the bed slowly, her experienced gaze cataloging symptoms and assessing severity. The rash had indeed spread extensively, covering Emma's neck and what was visible of her chest above the nightgown. Her breathing was labored, and when Sierra gently felt her pulse, it was rapid and irregular, signs that the illness had progressed dangerously far. "We must act quickly," she said, turning to Crawford. "I need clean water, fresh linens, and a fire in the grate, regardless of the heat." Crawford nodded to the young maid hovering anxiously in the corner, who hurried to comply. He seemed about to speak, then hesitated, torn between desperate hope and lingering doubt. Sierra read his expression clearly. "If you cannot trust me fully, I cannot help her," she said quietly. "You must decide now." For a long moment, Crawford stood frozen in indecision. Then Emma coughed weakly, the sound rattling ominously in her chest, and his resolve hardened. "Do whatever is necessary," he said, stepping back from the bed. "Save my daughter." Sierra nodded once, accepting both the permission and the enormous responsibility it carried. She turned to Ethan, who had been examining Emma with professional restraint despite the painful echoes of Catherine's final days. "I will need your assistance," she said, opening her medicine pouch. "And your trust." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "You have both." As Sierra began unpacking her supplies on the bedside table, Ethan gently ushered Crawford toward the door. "It would be best if you waited outside," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "We'll need space to work." Crawford resisted briefly, then relented, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion and worry. "Call me when—" He couldn't finish the thought. "We will," Ethan promised. closing the door behind him. Alone with their patient and the quietly efficient maid, Sierra and Ethan exchanged a look of shared purpose. The night ahead would test them both, their skills, their beliefs, and the fragile trust forming between them. As Sierra began preparing the first of her remedies, the fire crackling in the grate, and Emma's labored breathing the only sounds in the room, she felt the weight of two worlds resting on her shoulders. "We begin," she said simply, and Ethan nodded, rolling up his sleeves to join her in the ancient battle against death's approach. Outside, the desert night wrapped around Mesa Springs like a velvet shroud, stars piercing the darkness with cold, distant light. And somewhere in that darkness, Samuel Blackwood and his men continued their search, drawing ever closer to their quarry and the knowledge she protected. In the gray hours before dawn, when night reluctantly yields to approaching day, Sierra stood at Emma Crawford's bedroom window. Behind her, the girl slept peacefully for the first time in days, her breathing steady, the angry rash already fading from her skin. The battle had been long and uncertain, with moments when even Sierra doubted her knowledge would be enough against the advanced stage of the illness. Ethan dozed in a chair beside the bed, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, medical bag open at his feet. The night had forged something new between them, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Where Western medicine had faltered, Sierra's traditional remedies had taken hold. Where her supplies were inadequate, Ethan's training had bridged the gap. Together, they had accomplished what neither could have done alone. Sierra watched the first pale light spread across the eastern horizon. The coming day would bring new challenges, she knew. Emma's recovery was only the beginning. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Mayor Crawford entered hesitantly, his face haggard from a night spent pacing the hallway. His eyes went immediately to Emma, widening at the sight of her peaceful sleep. "She's—" His voice faltered, hope warring with disbelief. "The fever broke an hour ago," Sierra confirmed quietly, moving away from the window. "The medicine is working." Crawford approached the bed slowly, as if afraid his presence might somehow reverse the improvement. He laid a gentle hand on his daughter's forehead, exhaling sharply at the normal temperature he found there. "It's a miracle," he whispered. "Not a miracle," Sierra corrected, her voice firm but not unkind. "Knowledge. The wisdom of my people combined with Dr. Holloway's medical training." Ethan stirred at the sound of voices, blinking awake. He straightened in the chair, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his neck, and immediately checked Emma's pulse. His expression confirmed Sierra's assessment. "Her heart rate is normal," he reported. "Respiration steady. The rash is receding." He glanced up at Crawford. "She'll need continued treatment for several days, but the crisis has passed." Crawford seemed overwhelmed, his customary authority stripped away by exhaustion and relief. "How can I ever—" he began, then stopped, visibly struggling with concepts foreign to his nature. Gratitude toward those he had considered beneath him, recognition of knowledge he had dismissed as primitive. Sierra saved him the difficulty of completing the thought. "Emma will need to take a tea made from these herbs 3 times daily," she said, businesslike, indicating a small packet on the bedside table. "And this salve should be applied to any remaining rash. She must rest completely for at least 5 days, preferably longer." Crawford nodded, accepting the instructions with uncharacteristic humility. "Of course, whatever you recommend." The sun was rising fully now, golden light spilling through the window. Emma stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. All 3 adults tensed, watching as she slowly returned to consciousness. "Papa?" Her voice was weak but clear, her eyes focusing properly for the first time in days. Crawford moved swiftly to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here, sweetheart." "I had strange dreams," Emma murmured. "Mother was there, and someone was singing." Her gaze drifted to Sierra, confusion evident in her expression. "Who?" "This is Sierra," Crawford said, surprising both Sierra and Ethan with the respect in his tone. "She's a healer who helped make you well." Emma studied Sierra with the direct curiosity of youth. "You sang to me," she said with quiet certainty. "In my dreams. I couldn't understand the words, but they made me feel safe." Sierra inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the truth in the girl's words. "Songs can be medicine too," she said simply. A commotion downstairs interrupted the moment. Voices raised in argument, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. Crawford frowned, moving protectively toward the door just as it burst open. Dr. Warren stood in the doorway, face flushed with indignation. Behind him hovered a nervous-looking maid. "I'm sorry, sir," the maid stammered. "He insisted—" "It's all right, Mary," Crawford said, dismissing her with a nod before turning to Warren. "Doctor, I believe I made myself clear last night about—" "I am still Emma's physician of record," Warren interrupted, striding into the room. "And I have a responsibility to—" His voice trailed off as he caught sight of Emma, alert, fever-free, with the rash noticeably faded. He stopped, momentarily speechless. Emma offered a weak smile. "Good morning, to Warren." Warren approached the bed cautiously, professional skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. He reached automatically for her wrist, checking her pulse, then examined her eyes and the remaining rash with growing astonishment. "This is remarkable," he admitted finally, straightening up. "I wouldn't have thought possible." He glanced at Sierra, naked curiosity replacing some of his previous hostility. "What did you administer?" Sierra met his gaze steadily. "A combination of medicines, including willowbark extract, purple coneflower, and several herbs specific to this illness." Warren's brow furrowed. "Echinacea purpurea? That's a known immune stimulant, but hardly powerful enough for an infection of this severity." "Not alone," Sierra agreed, "but as part of a balanced treatment that addresses multiple aspects of the disease, it plays an important role." Warren turned to Ethan. "You supervised this treatment?" "I participated in it," Ethan corrected. "Sierra's knowledge of these remedies far exceeds mine." A complex series of emotions crossed Warren's face. Professional interest, lingering prejudice, and the natural defensiveness of a man whose methods had been outperformed. Finally, scientific curiosity seemed to win out. "I would be interested to know more about this treatment protocol," he said stiffly. "For the benefit of other patients, of course." Before Sierra could respond, a new disruption came from downstairs. Louder voices, a woman's frightened cry, and the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Deputy Miles's voice carried clearly up the staircase. "You have no authority here, Blackwood. Stand down." Ethan and Sierra exchanged an alarmed glance. Crawford moved immediately to the door, but Ethan caught his arm. "Howard," he said quietly, "there are men downstairs who are looking for Sierra. Bounty hunters." Crawford's expression hardened. "In my home? After she saved my daughter?" He shook off Ethan's hand. "Not while I draw breath." The unexpected support momentarily stunned both Ethan and Sierra. Crawford turned to Warren. "Doctor, please stay with them, the rest of you, with me." The scene downstairs was tense to the breaking point. James Miles stood with his back to the staircase, revolver drawn but pointed at the floor. Facing him were four men, led by a tall figure whose presence seemed to fill the elegant foyer with menace. Samuel Blackwood was exactly as Miles had described. Tall, with a scar bisecting his right cheek and the top joint missing from his left little finger. He wore the dust of the trail and an expression of cold determination. His three companions flanked him, hands hovering near their weapons. "This is becoming tiresome, Deputy," Blackwood was saying as Crawford descended the stairs, followed closely by Ethan and Sierra. "We have a legitimate contract to recover stolen property and apprehend the thief." Miles didn't budge. "And I've told you, this is a private residence. You can't just barge in with guns drawn." Blackwood's gaze shifted beyond Miles, a predatory smile spreading across his face as he caught sight of Sierra. "Well now," he drawled, "isn't this convenient?" Crawford moved forward, placing himself deliberately beside Miles. "What is the meaning of this intrusion, sir?" Blackwood swept off his hat with mocking courtesy. "Samuel Blackwood, sir, representing the Washington Pharmaceutical Company." He nodded toward Sierra. "That woman has stolen valuable property from my employers, a book of medicinal formulas worth a considerable sum. I'm here to recover it and bring her to justice." "The only property she possesses," Crawford said coldly, "is the knowledge that saved my daughter's life last night. Knowledge that belongs to her people, not your company." Blackwood's smile never wavered. "A touching sentiment, Mayor, but irrelevant to our business. The company has legal claim to those formulas. We have papers to prove it." "Forged papers?" Sierra spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the fear Ethan could sense beneath her composed exterior. based on lies and the testimony of a man who betrayed my people for whiskey and gold. Blackwood shrugged, unconcerned. The courts have recognized our claim. Now you can come quietly, or nothing, Miles interrupted, his revolver now raised slightly. You have no jurisdiction here, Blackwood. No authority to enter a private home or make arrests in my town. Tension crackled in the air like heat lightning before a storm. Blackwood's men shifted restlessly, eager for action. In the silence that followed Miles's statement, Dr. Warren appeared at the top of the stairs. Mayor Crawford, and he called, Emma is asking for you and for... He hesitated only briefly. For Sierra. Crawford seized the opportunity. Gentlemen, he announced with the authority of his office, my daughter requires medical attention. This discussion will have to wait. He turned to Blackwood, eyes cold. I suggest you take your grievance to the proper legal channels. In the meantime, get out of my house. For a moment it seemed Blackwood might defy the order, his hand twitching toward his gun. But something in Crawford's stance, or perhaps the presence of Miles's drawn weapon, made him reconsider. This isn't over, he said softly, eyes fixed on Sierra. Not by a long shot. He replaced his hat deliberately. We'll be in town when you're ready to be reasonable, Mayor, but my patience isn't unlimited. After the bounty hunters departed, an uneasy silence filled the foyer. Miles holstered his weapon with a sigh. They won't give up easily, he warned. Blackwood has a reputation for always collecting his bounties, one way or another. Crawford's expression was grim. Then we'll need to be prepared. He turned to Sierra. You saved Emma's life. I won't forget that debt. His gaze shifted to include Ethan and Miles. We should discuss our next steps privately. The impromptu council of war convened in Crawford's study, a wood-paneled room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive oak desk. Crawford took his seat behind it, the familiar position of authority seeming to steady him after the morning's upheavals. Deputy Miles, he began, what do we know about these bounty hunters legally? Miles leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Their paperwork is technically in order. The Washington Pharmaceutical Company filed patents on several medicinal compounds derived from Native American sources. They claim Sierra stole their research and are offering $500 for her capture and the return of what they call their proprietary formulas. Patents, Ethan repeated with disgust, on knowledge that's been passed down through generations. It's becoming common practice, Miles confirmed grimly. Companies send agents to reservations, record traditional remedies, then patent them as discoveries. Sierra, standing by the window, spoke quietly. 2 years ago, a white man came to our medicine people, claiming to be a government doctor interested in our healing ways. Many were suspicious, but our chief, my uncle, believed sharing knowledge might help both our peoples. Her expression darkened. The man documented everything, then disappeared. 3 months later, Blackwood and his men attacked our camp, demanding the medicine book. When we resisted, she didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Ethan moved closer to her, his presence offering silent support. The book they seek, Sierra continued after a moment, does not exist as they imagine it. Our knowledge is passed down orally through songs and stories. What I carry are my personal notes and some dried specimens, materials any healer would have. Crawford drummed his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. So there's nothing they could legally claim as their stolen property? Nothing, Sierra confirmed. But Blackwood doesn't seem concerned with such distinctions. No, he doesn't, Miles agreed darkly, and my jurisdiction only extends so far. If they catch her outside town limits, Crawford made a decision. Then she stays within town limits, under our protection, until we resolve this situation. He looked at Sierra directly. There are others in Mesa Springs showing symptoms of the same illnesses that struck Emma. Dr. Warren admitted as much before you arrived. Would you be willing to treat them? The request, so different from the contempt he had shown just days earlier, clearly surprised Sierra. I would, she said simply. It is my calling to heal where I can. Good. Crawford nodded, some of his usual decisiveness returning. You'll work with Dr. Warren. He raised a hand to forestall her objection. I know he's been hostile, but he's also the town's only physician. If he learns your methods, more people can be helped. Ethan exchanged a glance with Sierra, recognizing the wisdom in Crawford's approach. Not only would Sierra be safer working openly in town with official sanction, but the collaboration might begin bridging the divide between Western and traditional medicine. There's still the matter of Blackwood, Miles pointed out. He won't give up that bounty easily. Crawford smiled thinly. I believe I can handle Mr. Blackwood. He rose from his desk. As mayor, I have certain authorities regarding who may conduct business within town limits. And as president of Mesa Springs Bank, I have additional leverage. Ethan raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. Crawford had always been a shrewd political operator, but he'd never seen the man's abilities deployed for something he actually supported. In the meantime, Crawford continued, Miss Sierra will stay here, where my household staff can ensure her safety while she treats Emma and consults with Dr. Warren. Sierra straightened, her expression resolute. I need to return to Dr. Holloway's ranch first. Some of the medicines I require are there, and more ingredients must be gathered from the foothills. I'll accompany her, Ethan said immediately. We can collect what's needed and return by nightfall. Crawford considered this, then nodded. Deputy Miles will go with you, just in case Blackwood decides to circumvent my authority. He turned to Miles. Arrange for 2 of your most reliable men to stand watch here when you return. I'm not taking any chances with my daughter's care. As they prepared to leave, Emma called for Sierra once more. While Ethan and Miles waited downstairs, Sierra returned to the sick room, where the girl was sitting up against her pillows, remarkably improved from just hours earlier. You're leaving? Emma asked, disappointment evident in her voice. Sierra sat on the edge of the bed. Only for a short time. I need to gather more medicine to continue your treatment. Emma studied her with curious intensity. Will you teach me about the plants you use? Dr. Warren never explains anything. He just gives orders and expects them to be followed. Sierra smiled slightly, recognizing a kindred spirit in the girl's inquisitive nature. If your father permits it, yes. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Like your people share it, Emma asked, through songs and stories? Sierra's surprise must have shown on her face, for Emma explained, I heard you and Papa talking earlier. It's fascinating. Medicine through music. She hesitated. Would you teach me one of the songs someday? The request touched Sierra deeply, this young white girl asking to learn something of Apache culture, seeing value in traditions most settlers dismissed as primitive superstition. It offered a glimpse of a possible future where knowledge flowed freely between peoples, enriching both. I would be honored, Sierra said softly, when you are stronger. Emma smiled, satisfied with the promise. I'll hold you to that. Downstairs, Ethan and Miles were making final preparations for their journey. Crawford provided fresh horses from his own stable, a significant gesture of support that wasn't lost on any of them. As they mounted up, the morning sun now high in the cloudless sky, Crawford offered a final word of caution. Be vigilant, he warned. Blackwood struck me as a man accustomed to taking what he wants, law or no law. Miles patted the revolver at his hip. We'll be careful, Howard. You just make sure the town council's prepared to back your play when we return. The ride back to Ethan's ranch was tense but uneventful. They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main road where Blackwood and his men might be watching. The desert landscape shimmered under the summer heat, mirages forming and dissolving on the distant horizon. Strange how quickly things change, Miles observed as they rode. 3 days ago, most of Mesa Springs would have cheered to see an Apache woman driven out of town. Now the mayor himself is offering protection. Self-interest is a powerful motivator, Ethan replied. Crawford would promise the moon if it meant saving Emma. Sierra, riding between them, spoke quietly. The beginning of understanding often comes through necessity, not choice, but once begun, it can grow into something more. Miles nodded thoughtfully. Let's hope you're right. This territory has seen enough bloodshed between peoples who could benefit from working together. At the ranch, they worked quickly, gathering Sierra's remaining supplies and harvesting additional herbs from the garden Catherine had started years earlier. Sierra showed Ethan which plants to dig up completely for their roots and which to harvest sustainably, leaving enough for regrowth. Catherine understood this principle, Sierra noted, examining the careful way the garden had been designed. Taking only what is needed, ensuring more will grow for the future. She learned from the local Mexican farmers when we first arrived, Ethan explained, carefully wrapping the harvested roots in damp cloth. Said it made more sense than the way she'd been taught back east. Miles kept watch from the porch, rifle ready across his knees. The peaceful scene, two healers working together in a sunlit garden, contrasted sharply with the danger they knew was lurking just beyond their sight. By mid-afternoon, they had collected everything they needed from the ranch and were preparing for the journey to the foothills where the final crucial ingredients could be found. Sierra had just secured the last bundle of herbs to her saddle when Miles suddenly tensed, rising to his feet. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "At least 3, maybe 4. Ethan moved to stand beside him, shading his eyes against the sun. "Blackwood?" Miles nodded grimly. "Looks like, moving fast too." Sierra continued her preparations with deliberate calm. "We need the mountain golden seal. Without it, the treatment is incomplete." "We'll have to split up," Miles decided quickly. "Holloway, you take Sierra to the foothills. I'll stay here and delay them." Ethan frowned. "That's too risky, James. 4 against 1. Miles smiled thinly. "I've faced worse odds. Besides, they want her alive. They won't risk shooting with you two nearby." He checked his revolver. "I'll keep them talking. Maybe spin a tale about you heading for the reservation. Should buy you enough time to get what you need and circle back to town." Argument was futile. The dust cloud raised by the approaching riders was growing larger by the minute. Ethan clasped Miles' shoulder briefly. "Be careful." "Always am," Miles replied. "Now go, northeast path through the wash. It's less visible from the road." They rode hard, Sierra leading the way with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with reading landscapes. The dry wash provided good cover, its winding path hidden between rocky outcroppings. Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the ranch. "Will your friend be safe?" Sierra asked as they slowed to give their horses a brief rest in the shadow of a mesa. Ethan nodded. "Miles knows how to handle himself, and Blackwood wants information more than a confrontation at this point." Sierra's expression remained troubled. "Men like Blackwood take what they want by force. Your deputy should not have faced him alone." The concern in her voice touched something in Ethan. This woman who had faced so much hardship still worried about others' safety. "Miles made his choice," he said gently, "as we all do." They continued their journey, climbing steadily into the foothills, where the harsh desert gradually yielded to slightly more hospitable terrain. Small pockets of greenery appeared in protected valleys, fed by underground springs too deep for the drought to affect. Sierra dismounted near one such area, scanning the ground with practiced eyes. "There," she said finally, pointing to a cluster of plants nestled between rocks. "The golden seal grows where there is shade and moisture." As she carefully harvested the precious plants, Ethan kept watch, the silence of the wilderness broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. The peaceful moment felt surreal after the tension of the morning, a brief respite before returning to the human complications waiting in Mesa Springs. "My people believe these plants are gifts from the Creator," Sierra said as she worked, her hands gentle but efficient. "Each one with a purpose, if we learn to listen and understand." Ethan watched her, struck by the reverence with which she approached her task. "Catherine used to say something similar," he admitted, "that nature provides remedies for every ailment, if only we're humble enough to see them." Sierra glanced up at him. She was wise. Many of your doctors have forgotten this connection. They see the body as a machine to be fixed, not as part of the living world. The observation hit close to home. Ethan had been trained in precisely that tradition. Clinical, detached, focused on symptoms rather than the whole person. It had taken Catherine's illness and death to make him question those limitations. "I was one of those doctors," he said quietly, "until I failed to save the person who mattered most to me." Sierra straightened, securing the harvested plants in her pouch. "And now?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "Now I think there's more than one path to healing, and I've been walking the wrong one for too long." Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. Two healers from different traditions finding common ground in their shared purpose. Something shifted between them, a deepening of the connection that had been forming since that first night in the barn. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a gunshot, followed by several more in rapid succession. "That came from the direction of town," Ethan said, instantly alert. They mounted quickly, abandoning the careful pace of their earlier journey for speed. As they crested a rise overlooking Mesa Springs, They saw a plume of smoke rising from the south end of town. Fire, Sierra said unnecessarily, her expression grim. They rode hard for the town, dust rising behind them as their horses sensed their urgency. As they drew closer, the extent of the situation became clear. A building was fully engulfed in flames. Townspeople formed a bucket brigade from the nearest well, and shouting could be heard even from a distance. It's the livery stable, Ethan realized as they approached, right next to Crawford's bank. They dismounted at the edge of town, leaving their horses at the water trough outside the general store. The scene before them was chaos. Men shouting, women hurrying children away from danger, and the livery stable a roaring inferno, sending sparks dancing toward the neighboring buildings. Deputy Miles spotted them first, breaking away from directing the bucket line to approach them quickly. "Thank God you're back," he said, voice hoarse from smoke. Blackwood set the fire as a distraction. He and his men tried to break into Crawford's house during the commotion. Ethan's blood ran cold. "Emma, she's safe," Miles assured him quickly. Crawford had men posted as promised. Blackwood and two of his gang were driven off, but his fourth man was captured. His expression darkened. Crawford's holding him at the bank. Sierra clutched her medicine pouch tightly. "This is my fault. All of this destruction—" "No," Ethan cut her off firmly. "Blackwood made his choices. You're not responsible for his actions." Miles nodded agreement. "Holloway's right, but we need to move quickly. The fire's spreading, and Crawford's, well, let's just say he's taking this attack on his home and daughter personally." They made their way through the crowded street, past townspeople fighting the fire, and others simply watching in horrified fascination. At Crawford's Bank, a solid brick building that stood as a symbol of permanence amid the predominantly wooden structures of Mesa Springs, two armed men guarded the entrance. They recognized Miles and allowed them to pass without question. Inside, the bank's usual business had been suspended, the teller's windows empty, and the lobby deserted. Crawford's voice carried from his private office at the rear of the building. "I'll ask you once more," they heard him say, his tone colder than Ethan had ever heard it. "Where is Blackwood planning to take her if he succeeds?" An unfamiliar voice responded, strained but defiant. "Go to hell, Crawford. You think I'm afraid of a banker?" The sound of a sharp blow followed. Miles winced, hurrying toward the office with Ethan and Sierra close behind. Crawford stood behind his desk, face flushed with anger. One of his bank guards stood nearby, expression impassive. Tied to a chair before them was a rough-looking man with blood trickling from his split lip, one of Blackwood's bounty hunters. "Howard," Miles said sharply, "this isn't the way." Crawford barely glanced at them. "These men tried to abduct my daughter, James. They set fire to our town. Conventional methods seem inadequate." The captured bounty hunter spat blood onto the polished floor. "Your daughter wasn't the target," he snarled. "We just wanted the squaw and her medicine book." Sierra stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her simple dress and travel-worn appearance. "There is no book as you imagine it," she said evenly. "Only knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge that belongs to my people, not to men who would use it for our profit without understanding." The bounty hunter laughed harshly. "Tell that to Blackwood. He's got papers saying that knowledge belongs to Washington Pharmaceutical now." His gaze turned calculating. $500 is a lot of money, enough to make most men in this town look the other way while we take what we came for. "You underestimate Mesa Springs," Crawford said coldly. He turned to Miles. "What's the situation with the fire?" "Under control, last I saw," Miles reported. "But it's destroyed the livery and damaged Pearson's feed store. We're lucky the wind didn't shift toward the residential areas." Crawford's expression hardened further. "Property damage, attempted kidnapping, assault." He listed the offenses like a judge passing sentence. "More than enough to hold this man while we deal with Blackwood." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Ethan asked. "He still has two men with him, and he's proven he's willing to resort to extreme measures." "By giving him what he wants," Sierra said quietly. All eyes turned to her in surprise. "I will meet with Blackwood," she continued, her voice steady despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. "On neutral ground, with witnesses." "Absolutely not," Ethan objected immediately. "He can't be trusted." Sierra met his gaze directly. "No, he cannot. But neither can he be avoided forever. And while we hide, others fall ill. She turned to Crawford. How many in town now show symptoms of the fever? Crawford frowned. Warren reported 3 new cases this morning, all in the early stages. They need treatment, Sierra said simply, and I cannot provide it while hiding behind closed doors or causing more conflict in your town. Miles studied her with newfound respect. What exactly are you proposing? A public meeting, Sierra explained, in your town hall or church, where Blackwood must behave according to law and custom. I will explain that there is no physical book to be taken, only knowledge that I am willing to share under certain conditions. He won't accept that, the captured bounty hunter sneered. He gets paid for delivering, not for coming back empty-handed. Sierra's expression remained calm. Then he will have to make a choice, to accept a compromise that benefits many, or to persist in violence that will ultimately gain him nothing. Crawford leaned forward, hands flat on his desk. And what compromise did you have in mind? I will document my treatments, the herbs used, the preparations, the applications. Dr. Warren can verify their efficacy as we treat those who are ill. Sierra's gaze swept over them all. The knowledge will be shared publicly, belonging to no one person or company, but available to all who wish to heal. The elegance of the solution impressed even Crawford. By making the knowledge public, she would undermine Washington Pharmaceuticals' claim to exclusive ownership, while simultaneously ensuring the treatments would benefit as many people as possible. Blackwood won't like it, Miles warned. His employers even less so. No, Sierra agreed. But what alternative can they pursue without exposing their true intentions? If they claim to want this knowledge for the public good, they should welcome its distribution. If they resist, they reveal their greed. Ethan felt a surge of admiration for her strategy, even as worry gnawed at him. It's still dangerous. Blackwood isn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Which is why the meeting must be public, Sierra insisted, with many witnesses, including those of influence. She looked pointedly at Crawford, the mayor, the town doctor, the law. Her gaze shifted to Miles, and those who have benefited from the treatment already. Crawford nodded slowly, understanding her intention. Emma, my public support would carry weight. He straightened, decision made. Very well, we'll arrange this meeting for tomorrow morning at the town church. It's the largest gathering place we have. In the meantime, Miles added, we'll keep our friend here as a guest of the town jail. He gestured to the captured bounty hunter. And post additional guards at your home, Howard. As preparations were made to transport the prisoner, Sierra drew Ethan aside. I need to return to Emma and the other patients, she said. The medicines we gathered should be prepared immediately. Ethan studied her face, seeing the determination beneath her composed exterior. You're really willing to give up your people's knowledge like this? After protecting it for so long? Sierra's expression softened slightly. I am not giving it up, Dr. Holloway. I am sharing it, but on my terms, not Blackwood's. There is a difference. And if Blackwood doesn't accept your terms? Her eyes met his directly. Then we will face that challenge when it comes. But I will not hide while people suffer from an illness I can treat, nor will I allow fear to prevent me from fulfilling my purpose as a healer. The simplicity and courage of her position humbled him. Despite everything she had endured, the attacks on her people, the long journey alone, the constant threat of capture, her commitment to healing remained unshaken. Then I'll be with you, Ethan said firmly. Whatever happens. A hint of a smile touched Sierra's lips. I had hoped you would say that. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Sierra returned to Crawford's home to continue Emma's treatment and prepare medicines for the new cases Dr. Warren had identified. To everyone's surprise, Warren himself proved more receptive than expected, his scientific curiosity gradually overcoming his initial prejudice as he observed the effectiveness of Sierra's remedies. By evening, all 3 new patients were showing improvement, and Emma was sitting up in bed, color returned to her cheeks, helping Sierra prepare medicinal teas under Dr. Warren's watchful eye. The proportions must be exact, Sierra explained as Emma carefully measured dried herbs into a ceramic bowl. Too much of the willow bark causes stomach distress. Too little fails to reduce the fever. Warren observed with poorly concealed fascination. The combination appears more effective than any single component would turn alone, he noted, making entries in a small notebook, a principle we're only beginning to explore in modern pharmacology. My people have understood this balance for generations, Sierra said without reproach. Different plants work together, just as different organs in the body work together. Warren's pen paused above his notebook. A holistic approach, he murmured, almost to himself, treating the whole rather than just the symptom. Emma looked up from her work, eyes bright with interest. Is that why you sing when preparing the medicines, Sierra? To treat the spirit as well as the body? Sierra smiled at the girl's perceptiveness. Yes, healing is not only physical. The mind and spirit must also be engaged in recovery. Warren might have scoffed at such a notion days earlier, but now he simply made another note. Fascinating, he said. I would be interested to learn more about this integrated approach. The exchange was interrupted by Ethan's arrival, accompanied by Deputy Miles. Both men looked grave. Word's been sent to Blackwood about tomorrow's meeting, Miles reported. He's agreed to attend, but made it clear he expects to leave with either Sierra or her medicine book. He'll be disappointed then, Crawford said from the doorway, where he had been quietly observing the scene. Miles, what's the status in town? The fire's out completely. Damage was contained to the livery and part of the feed store. Most folks are back home, but there's talk. Miles glanced at Sierra. Some blame the Apache woman for bringing trouble. Others are starting to hear about the successful treatments. Opinions divided. Crawford nodded thoughtfully. Have Dr. Warren's new patients well enough to attend tomorrow's meeting? Their testimony would be valuable. The Wilkins boy and Mrs. Peterson should be strong enough, Warren confirmed. Mrs. Abernathy is still quite weak, though improving. Good. Crawford turned to Sierra. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be challenging. As night fell over Mesa Springs, an uneasy quiet settled on the town. Guards were posted at Crawford's home and at strategic points throughout the settlement. In the jail, Blackwood's captured man sat in sullen silence, refusing further cooperation. In the guest room assigned to her, Sierra stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled desert sky. The same stars had guided her people for centuries, unchanging witnesses to the ebb and flow of human affairs below. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, possibly danger, but also opportunity, a chance to preserve her people's knowledge in a new form, ensuring it would survive even if she did not. A soft knock at the door drew her from her thoughts. Ethan entered at her invitation carrying a small wooden box. I thought you might want this, he said, offering her the box. It was Catherine's. Sierra opened it carefully to find a beautiful silver pendant nested on velvet, a delicate design of intertwined leaves surrounding a small piece of turquoise. She bought it from a Navajo silversmith the first year we came west, Ethan explained. Said it reminded her that beauty can be found even in the harshest environments. Sierra touched the pendant gently. It is lovely, but why? For tomorrow, Ethan said simply. You'll be representing not only yourself, but your people's knowledge. Catherine would have wanted you to have something dignified for the occasion. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Sierra deeply. Thank you, she said softly. I will wear it with honor. Ethan hesitated, then spoke the concern that had been troubling him. Sierra, if things go badly tomorrow, I have considered that possibility, she interrupted gently, and made my peace with it. Some risks must be taken when the need is great enough. I won't let Blackwood take you, Ethan said, his voice low but intense, no matter what happens. Sierra studied him, seeing the determination in his eyes. In the short time they had known each other, this man had transformed from a reluctant host to a committed ally, perhaps even something more. I believe you, she said simply. Now get some rest, Dr. Holloway. Tomorrow we both must be at our strongest. Dawn broke over Mesa Springs with the promise of another scorching day. By mid-morning, the town church was filled to capacity, curious citizens packed into the pews, while others crowded the doorway and windows. At the front, Mayor Crawford presided from behind the pulpit, flanked by Deputy Miles and Dr. Warren. Emma sat in the front row, pale but determined to support the woman who had saved her life. Sierra stood calmly beside Ethan, dressed in her own clothes, freshly cleaned and mended, Catherine's pendant gleaming at her throat. Her medicine pouch hung at her side, its contents organized and ready for demonstration. The murmur of the crowd hushed as the church doors opened to admit Samuel Blackwood and his remaining men. Blackwood strode down the center aisle with the confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating others. His gaze fixed on Sierra, ignoring the assembled townspeople. He stopped at the front, deliberately turning his back to Crawford. "I see you finally come to your senses," he said to Sierra, voice carrying in the silent church. "Ready to return what you stole?" Sierra met his gaze steadily. "I have stolen nothing, Mr. Blackwood, and I am here to demonstrate that fact to all present." Crawford cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, this meeting has been called to resolve the dispute between you and Miss Sierra in a peaceful, lawful manner. You will address your comments to me as the presiding authority." Blackwood turned slowly, contempt evident in his posture. "With all due respect, Mayor, this isn't a legal proceeding. I have legitimate documentation authorizing me to recover stolen property and apprehend the thief." He withdrew papers from his coat, signed by a federal judge in Santa Fe. Miles stepped forward to examine the documents. These authorize the recovery of a book of medicinal formulas originating from Apache tribal sources, illegally removed from authorized research materials belonging to Washington Pharmaceutical Company. He looked up. "Nothing here about apprehending anyone." Blackwood's expression hardened. "The theft and the thief are inseparable in this case." "That would be true," Sierra said clearly, "if there had been a theft, but there was not." She turned to address the assembled townspeople. "2 years ago, a man came to my people claiming to be documenting our healing practices for a government study. He was, in fact, gathering information to sell to private interests." Murmurs spread through the congregation as Sierra continued. "The book Mr. Blackwood seeks does not exist. Our knowledge is passed down through teaching and apprenticeship, not written texts." She opened her medicine pouch. "What I carry are my own notes and materials, as any healer would." Dr. Warren stepped forward. "I can confirm that Miss Sierra has used these materials to successfully treat 4 cases of the fever that has afflicted our town, including Mayor Crawford's daughter and 3 others who were gravely ill." Emma rose from her seat. "She saved my life," the girl said clearly, when Dr. Warren said nothing more could be done. Warren nodded, surprising everyone with his humility. "It's true. My methods were ineffective against this particular illness. Miss Sierra's treatments, however, produced remarkable results." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "A touching testimonial, but irrelevant to my business here. Those remedies are the property of Washington Pharmaceutical, legally obtained and patented." "How can anyone patent knowledge that has existed for generations?" Ethan challenged. "These aren't new inventions. They're traditional medicines known to Sierra's people long before your company ever heard of them." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Crawford seized the moment. "Miss Sierra has made a proposal," he announced. "She will document all treatments used for the fever to be maintained as public knowledge for the benefit of all. Dr. Warren will verify their efficacy through continued application. By making this knowledge public," Miles added, "it becomes prior art, ineligible for private patent." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "That's theft of intellectual property." "It cannot be theft," Sierra replied calmly, "to share what was always meant to be shared. My people did not hoard healing knowledge for profit, but preserved it for the good of all." The crowd's mood was shifting perceptibly in Sierra's favor. Even those who had been suspicious of the Apache woman were swayed by Emma's testimony and under Dart Warren's unexpected support. Blackwood sensed the changing tide. His hand drifted toward his gun. "This is very entertaining, but it doesn't change facts. I have legal authorization to recover Washington Pharmaceuticals' property, and I intend to do just that." Miles moved his hand to rest on his own weapon. "I wouldn't advise that course of action, Blackwood. Not in a church full of witnesses." Tension crackled in the air. Blackwood's men shifted nervously, outnumbered but still dangerous. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between resolution and violence. Into this charged atmosphere came an unexpected voice from the back of the church. "Perhaps I might offer a perspective," said an elderly man who rose slowly from his seat, "as someone with a vested interest in this matter." All heads turned. The speaker was a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, impeccably dressed despite the frontier setting. He made his way deliberately to the front of the church, leaning on a polished walking stick. Judge Franklin Mercer, he introduced himself, recently retired from the Federal Circuit Court in Santa Fe and currently a major shareholder in Washington Pharmaceutical Company. Blackwood's expression registered shock, then careful neutrality. Judge Mercer, I wasn't aware you were in Mesa Springs. Visiting my daughter's family, Mercer explained, nodding toward a woman in the congregation. Fortunate timing, it seems. He turned to Sierra. I've heard your proposal with great interest, young woman. It presents a dilemma for our company, but also an opportunity. Crawford offered the judge his place at the pulpit. Mercer accepted with a nod of thanks before continuing. Washington Pharmaceuticals' interest in native remedies is fundamentally sound. These treatments have proven effective where conventional medicine fails. However, he fixed Blackwood with a stern gaze. Our methods of acquisition have been questionable. Setting fire to a town and threatening its citizens certainly falls outside ethical business practices. Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, recognizing the shift in power dynamics. As a significant shareholder, Mercer continued, I propose an alternative arrangement. Miss Sierra will document her treatments as suggested. Washington Pharmaceutical will sponsor the publication of this knowledge for general medical use, not as a patent holder, but as a contributor to public health. He smiled thinly. The company will, of course, benefit from being associated with effective treatments during a time of increasing illness. Reputation has value beyond exclusive ownership. The proposal was masterful, offering Washington Pharmaceutical a way to save face while effectively conceding to Sierra's terms. Blackwood clearly recognized his position had become untenable. The company directors may not share your philanthropic view, Judge Mercer, he said stiffly. Perhaps not, Mercer agreed, but as the company's legal counsel relied on my court for their patents, they may wish to consider my recommendation carefully. The threat was velvet-covered but unmistakable. Crawford stepped forward. It seems we have the outline of an agreement. Miss Sierra will work with Dr. Warren to document the treatments, with Judge Mercer overseeing the arrangement to ensure fair representation of all interests. Sierra nodded her acceptance. This preserves the knowledge as it was intended, for the benefit of all who need healing. Blackwood recognized defeat. I will communicate this proposal to my employers, he said coldly. In the meantime, I expect our man released from your jail, Deputy Miles. Once you are ready to leave town peacefully, Miles countered, and after you've paid compensation for the damage to our livery stable and feed store. The meeting concluded with details arranged for the documentation process and Blackwood's departure. As the church emptied, townspeople lingered to speak with Sierra, some offering thanks, others simply curious about the remedies that had saved their neighbors. In the aftermath, Ethan found Sierra standing quietly in the churchyard, her face turned toward the distant mountains. You did it, he said, joining her. Your knowledge is safe and will help countless people. Sierra smiled faintly. Not my knowledge, my people's knowledge. I am merely its caretaker for a time, as others were before me and others will be after. What will you do now? Ethan asked, the question that had been weighing on him since the resolution became clear. Return to the reservation? Sierra was silent for a long moment. There is still much work to do here, she said finally. Dr. Warren has much to learn about these treatments, and there are other illnesses I could help with. She glanced at him. If I am welcome to stay. The relief Ethan felt surprised him with its intensity. More than welcome, he said quietly. My ranch needs your expertise. The garden has never been so productive, and Thunder has never been healthier. Sierra studied his face. Is it only the ranch that needs me, Dr. Holloway? The directness of the question caught him off guard, but also seemed fitting. This woman had never been anything but honest with him. No, he admitted. Not only the ranch. He took a deep breath. I've been half alive since Catherine died. Existing, not living. These past days with you have reminded me what it means to have purpose again. To see value in the future. Sierra's expression softened. I too have been merely surviving since the attack on my people. Running, hiding, protecting knowledge instead of using it as it was meant to be used. She touched the pendant at her throat. Perhaps we have both found a new path. Around them, Mesa Springs continued its daily rhythms, changed subtly but significantly by recent events. At Crawford's home, Emma was already asking Dr. Warren about studying medicine properly. At the jail, Miles was arranging for Blackwood's compensation payment and departure. In Dr. Warren's office, patients waited for treatments that now combined Western and Apache approaches. $3, Ethan said suddenly. Sierra looked at him questioningly. You offered me $3 that first day, he explained, for shelter and a wash. I never took them. Sierra smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. The beginning of an exchange that became something more. Much more, Ethan agreed. He hesitantly offered his hand. Partners? Sierra took it without hesitation, her grip firm and warm. Partners, she agreed. Above them, the desert sky stretched endlessly, the same sky that had witnessed countless human struggles, separations, and reunions across the centuries. And beneath that sky, two healers from different worlds stood together, finding in each other's strength the courage to begin again.